What if the life you wanted was still waiting for you, even after you stopped believing in it? Rachel Morgan heard the alarm at 5:15 in the morning and immediately reached for her phone before it could wake her twins. The small apartment was still dark, and for a moment she allowed herself exactly 3 seconds to stay under the blanket. Then reality returned. Lunches needed to be packed. Breakfast needed to be made. 2 8-year-olds needed help finding shoes that somehow disappeared every morning. At 34 years old, Rachel had become an expert at functioning while exhausted. She moved quietly through the apartment, preparing oatmeal and fruit while reviewing the day ahead. Her shift at the grocery store started at 7. Lily had a school project due. Lucas needed permission forms signed. The rent payment was due next week. The numbers in her bank account were already too familiar. By 6 o'clock, the apartment had transformed from silent to chaotic. Lily searched for a missing notebook. Lucas insisted he had already brushed his teeth, even though the evidence suggested otherwise. Rachel handled everything with the calm patience she had developed over years of doing the work of 2 parents alone. After dropping the twins at school, she drove directly to the grocery store where she worked as a shift manager. The job paid the bills, most of the time, but it was never the future she once imagined for herself. Years ago, Rachel had dreamed of starting a community learning center where working parents could find affordable support for their children. Back then, she believed almost anything was possible. Life had other plans. Responsibilities arrived. Bills multiplied. Dreams became luxuries she could no longer afford. By late afternoon, the store was unusually busy. Customers filled the aisles. Employees requested assistance from every direction. Rachel moved from one task to another without stopping. Even during the rush, she noticed an older customer struggling to reach an item on a high shelf and immediately stepped in to help. 10 minutes later, she calmed a frustrated shopper. 15 minutes after that, she helped a new employee solve a scheduling problem. Most people never noticed how many small challenges she solved every day. Rachel rarely noticed either. She simply kept going. Near the end of her shift, she finally stepped outside for a brief break. The autumn air felt cool against her face. She sat alone on a bench near the store entrance and closed her eyes for a moment. That was when she heard a voice. Long day. Rachel looked up and saw a well-dressed man standing nearby holding a cup of coffee. He appeared to be in his mid-40s. There was nothing flashy about him, yet he carried himself with quiet confidence. "You could say that," Rachel replied with a tired smile. The stranger sat on the opposite end of the bench. For a few minutes they exchanged casual conversation about work, weather, and life. Then the man asked a question that caught her completely off guard. His tone remained calm. "If nobody could tell you no," he said, "what would you build?" Rachel stared at him. The question seemed simple, yet her mind went completely blank. For several seconds, she could not speak. Somewhere beneath years of responsibilities and survival, a forgotten dream suddenly tried to make itself heard again. And for the first time in a very long time, Rachel realized she did not know the answer. And for the first time in a very long time, Rachel realized she did not know the answer. The stranger's question followed her home that evening like an unfinished conversation. As Rachel Morgan drove through town after picking up Lily and Lucas from school, she found herself replaying the moment again and again. It was not simply what he had asked. It was how quickly the question had uncovered something she had spent years burying. By the time they arrived at the apartment, the twins were already talking excitedly about their day. Lily had received praise for her science project. Lucas proudly announced that he had scored the winning point during recess. Rachel smiled, listened, and encouraged them as she always did. Yet part of her mind remained somewhere else. During dinner, Lucas noticed first. "Mom," he said while eating spaghetti, "you are doing that thing again." Rachel looked up. "What thing?" Lily immediately joined the conversation. "The staring thing." Rachel laughed softly. "I do not stare." "You do," Lucas insisted. "It means you are thinking about something." Rachel could not argue with that. After the twins went to bed, she sat alone at the small kitchen table. The apartment was quiet except for the gentle hum of the refrigerator. She stared out the window and allowed herself to think honestly for the first time in years. If nobody could tell you no, what would you build? The answer slowly emerged from a place she thought no longer existed. She remembered sketches she had once drawn in notebooks. She remembered plans she created during college. She remembered the dream of opening a community learning center where working parents could find affordable childcare, tutoring, mentoring programs, and support services. It had never been about making money. It had always been about helping families who felt overwhelmed and alone. Families like her own. Rachel shook her head and smiled sadly. Dreams were easy when life was simple. Reality had changed everything. The next morning brought another busy day. The grocery store remained crowded. Deliveries arrived late. Employees called in sick. Customers needed assistance. Yet through it all, Rachel noticed something unusual. She was paying closer attention to her own abilities. She solved problems quickly. She managed people effectively. She stayed calm under pressure. These were skills she used every day without thinking. Perhaps they mattered more than she realized. Late that afternoon, Rachel stepped outside during another short break. To her surprise, the stranger was sitting on the same bench. He looked up and smiled when he saw her. "Hello again." Rachel stopped walking. "You came back." "I did." He gestured toward the empty space beside him. "Have you thought about my question?" Rachel sat down slowly. "More than I wanted to." The man chuckled. "That usually means it was the right question." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Rachel surprised herself. She told him about the learning center she had once dreamed of building. She described after-school programs, educational support, and resources for parents struggling to balance work and family life. The stranger listened carefully without interrupting. When she finished, he asked another unexpected question. "Why did you stop believing you could do it?" Rachel opened her mouth to answer, but paused. She had plenty of reasons. Lack of money, raising twins alone, long work hours, constant responsibilities. Yet somehow none of those explanations felt complete. The stranger nodded thoughtfully, as though he understood the answer she could not quite express. Then he stood and glanced at his watch. "Thank you for sharing that." Rachel looked up. "You never told me your name." A small smile appeared on his face. "Daniel." Before leaving, he handed her a business card. Rachel barely glanced at it as he walked away. But a few seconds later, curiosity made her look down. The moment she read the name beneath the company logo, her eyes widened in disbelief. The moment she read the name beneath the company logo, her eyes widened in disbelief. Daniel Carter. Even Rachel Morgan recognized the name. Articles about business leaders occasionally appeared online, and Daniel's name seemed to surface everywhere. His companies employed thousands of people. His foundation funded education programs across the country. According to the card in her hand, the man who had spent 2 afternoons sitting on a grocery store bench asking thoughtful questions was one of the most successful billionaires in America. Rachel looked up instinctively, but Daniel was already walking toward a waiting vehicle at the far end of the parking lot. For several seconds, she simply stood there holding the card. None of it made sense. Why would someone like him spend time talking to someone like her? That evening, she searched his name online after the twins went to bed. The results only increased her confusion. There were photographs of Daniel speaking at conferences, opening community initiatives, and meeting with government officials. Yet the man in those images seemed almost different from the person she had met. The Daniel she knew asked questions and listened carefully. The billionaire described online looked larger than life. Rachel eventually closed her laptop and tried to sleep, but the conversation kept returning to her thoughts. Why did you stop believing you could do it? The question felt even harder than the first one. Over the next week, life continued as usual. The twins went to school. Rachel worked long shifts. Bills still needed to be paid. Yet something inside her had begun to change. She found herself noticing opportunities instead of obstacles. When employees at the store faced challenges, she naturally organized solutions. When customers needed help, she anticipated problems before they happened. More importantly, she started remembering pieces of the dream she had abandoned. One afternoon, Lily and Lucas were working on homework at the kitchen table when Lily discovered an old storage box in the apartment closet. "Mom, what is this?" she asked. Rachel opened the box and immediately froze. Inside were notebooks she had not seen in years. Sketches, plans, budgets, floor layouts, ideas for the learning center she once wanted to create. Lucas looked through several pages. "You made all this?" Rachel nodded. "A long time ago." Lily studied the drawings carefully. "This looks real." Rachel smiled sadly. It was supposed to be. The twins continued examining the materials with growing excitement. They asked questions about classrooms, tutoring programs, and activities for children. As Rachel explained her original vision, she noticed something surprising. For the first time in years, speaking about the dream made her feel energized instead of disappointed. A few days later, an unexpected email arrived. The sender was Daniel Carter's office. Rachel assumed it had been sent by mistake. After reading it twice, she realized it was genuine. The message invited her to attend a small community leadership workshop being held the following weekend. Attendance was limited. Local participants had been selected based on recommendations and observations from community leaders. Rachel immediately suspected Daniel was responsible. Her first instinct was to decline. She was busy. She was not qualified. She had twins to raise and a full-time job. Yet every excuse sounded strangely familiar. They were the same. Reasons she had given herself for years whenever an opportunity appeared. That evening, she showed the email to Lily and Lucas. The twins reacted exactly as she feared. "You have to go," Lily said instantly. "Definitely," Lucas agreed. Rachel laughed. "That is not how decisions work." "Why not?" Lucas asked. Rachel opened her mouth to answer, but found herself smiling instead. Deep down, she already knew something important. The mysterious billionaire had not simply asked a question. He had awakened a part of her life she thought was gone forever. And for the first time, Rachel was beginning to wonder whether her dream had been delayed rather than destroyed. The community leadership workshop took place the following Saturday inside a renovated conference center about 30 miles from town. Rachel Morgan almost turned around twice during the drive. The entire situation felt far outside her comfort zone. She was used to managing grocery store schedules, helping customers, and raising twins. She was not used to attending events filled with business owners, nonprofit directors, and community leaders. Yet Lily and Lucas had refused to let her back out. By the time she arrived, their final words were still echoing in her mind. "Just go see what happens." The conference center lobby buzzed with conversation. Participants from different backgrounds gathered around tables discussing projects and ideas. Rachel immediately felt underdressed despite choosing her nicest outfit. For a moment, she considered finding the nearest exit. Then she noticed a familiar face. Daniel Carter stood across the room, speaking with several attendees. Unlike the photographs she had seen online, he looked relaxed and approachable. When he spotted her, he smiled and walked over. "I was hoping you would come." Rachel laughed nervously. "I almost did not." "Most people worth meeting say that," Daniel replied. The comment surprised her. Before she could respond, the workshop began. Throughout the morning, speakers discussed leadership, problem-solving, and community development. Rachel expected complicated business strategies. Instead, many presentations focused on understanding people, identifying needs, and creating practical solutions. To her surprise, she found herself enjoying the discussions. During a breakout session, participants were asked to describe a challenge they had personally experienced and propose a solution. Rachel initially planned to remain quiet. Then she heard other attendees describing issues that felt distant from everyday life. Without thinking, she raised her hand. She spoke about working parents struggling to find affordable support for their children. She described long work hours, transportation problems, after-school gaps, and the stress of balancing responsibilities. As she shared her experiences, the room grew noticeably quieter. People listened carefully. Several participants took notes. When she finished, one woman across the table said, "That is one of the most practical ideas we have heard all morning." Rachel blinked in surprise. Another participant agreed. Suddenly, the conversation shifted toward her proposal. Questions followed. Suggestions emerged. For nearly 40 minutes, the group explored ways a community learning center might actually work. Rachel left the session feeling both encouraged and overwhelmed. During lunch, Daniel joined her at a table near the windows. "You handled yourself well in there," he said. Rachel shook her head. "I was terrified." Daniel smiled. "Most people think confidence comes first." He paused. "Usually action comes first. Confidence follows." Rachel considered the statement carefully. Then she asked the question that had been bothering her for days. "Why did you invite me?" Daniel looked out the window for a moment before answering. "Because I pay attention to problem solvers." Rachel laughed softly. "I stock shelves and manage schedules." "No," Daniel said gently. "You manage people. You solve problems. You build trust. You do it every day." His words struck deeper than she expected. Nobody had ever described her that way before. For years she had measured herself by what she had not accomplished. Daniel seemed focused on what she was already doing well. As the workshop ended, Participants exchanged contact information and discussed future projects. Rachel walked toward her car feeling different than when she arrived. Not transformed, not suddenly confident, but something had shifted. For the first time in years, she felt seen. And as she drove home to Lily and Lucas, she had no idea that Daniel was already preparing an opportunity that would test whether she truly believed in her own potential. And as she drove home to Lily and Lucas, she had no idea that Daniel was already preparing an opportunity that would test whether she truly believed in her own potential. The opportunity arrived 3 days later in the form of another email. Rachel Morgan opened it during her lunch break at the grocery store and immediately read it twice to make sure she understood correctly. Daniel Carter's foundation was launching a pilot program designed to support community-based projects. A small group of participants from the leadership workshop would receive mentoring, training, and access to resources to help develop ideas capable of improving local communities. Rachel had been selected as one of the candidates. Her first reaction was disbelief. Her second reaction was fear. By the time her shift ended, she had already convinced herself there must have been a mistake. Driving home, she mentally listed dozens of reasons she did not belong in such a program. She had no business degree. She had no investors. She had no experience running an organization. She was a single mother working full-time while raising twins. Surely there were more qualified people available. Yet later that evening, after dinner, Lily and Lucas noticed something was bothering her. "What happened?" Lily asked. Rachel showed them the email. The twins carefully listened as she explained the program. When she finished, Lucas looked confused. "So why are you upset?" Rachel laughed. "I am not upset." "You have your worried face," Lily said. Rachel could not deny that either. She tried explaining her concerns. The program sounded important. The other participants would probably be experienced professionals. She worried about embarrassing herself. The twins listened patiently. Before Lucas asked a simple question, "Did they invite you?" Rachel nodded. "Then maybe they wanted you." The answer was so obvious that it left her speechless. Children had a remarkable ability to remove unnecessary complications from life. The following week, Rachel attended the first mentoring session. There were 12 participants in total. Some owned small businesses. Others led nonprofit organizations. Several had backgrounds that seemed far more impressive than her own. At first, Rachel remained quiet. She listened carefully and avoided drawing attention to herself. Then Daniel entered the room. The conversations immediately shifted. Although everyone clearly respected him, Rachel noticed something interesting. Daniel treated each participant exactly the same. He asked questions. He listened. He encouraged discussion. When the meeting reached the topic of community challenges, Rachel found herself speaking up again. She described the obstacles faced by working parents in her town. This time she spoke with greater confidence than before. To her surprise, several participants expressed strong interest in the concept. After the session ended, Daniel approached her. "How are you feeling?" he asked. Rachel smiled nervously. "Less terrified than last week." "That sounds like progress." They walked together toward the parking lot. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Rachel finally asked the question she had been carrying for weeks. "Why me?" Daniel looked genuinely curious. "Why not you?" Rachel laughed. "That is not an answer." "Actually, it is." He stopped walking and turned toward her. "Rachel, do you know how many people I meet who have ideas?" "Probably thousands." "Exactly." He nodded. "Ideas are common. Commitment is rare." Rachel listened carefully. Daniel continued. "You have spent years solving problems, helping people, and leading without a title that gives you credit for it." His expression softened. "I am not interested in resumes. I am interested in people who care enough to keep showing up." The words stayed with Rachel long after she drove home. For years, she had viewed her life through the lens of sacrifice and limitations. Daniel seemed to see something entirely different. And as the mentoring program continued gaining momentum, Rachel slowly began realizing that the billionaire's greatest secret was not his wealth. It was his ability to recognize potential in people long before they could see it themselves. And as the mentoring program continued gaining momentum, Rachel slowly began realizing that the billionaire's greatest secret was not his wealth. It was his ability to recognize potential in people long before they could see it themselves. Over the following month, Rachel Morgan settled into a demanding new routine. Her days still began before sunrise. She still prepared breakfast for Lily and Lucas, drove them to school, and worked long shifts at the grocery store. The difference was what happened afterward. Several evenings each week were now dedicated to the mentoring program. Between workshops, project planning sessions, and independent research, Rachel often found herself working later than ever. Surprisingly, she did not mind. For the first time in years, she felt as though she was moving towards something rather than simply trying to stay afloat. The idea for the Community Learning Center continued evolving. What began as a dream stored in old notebooks slowly transformed into a realistic proposal. Rachel worked closely with mentors who helped refine budgets, identify partnerships, and create sustainable operating plans. Each week brought new challenges, but also new confidence. The greatest support often came from the two people waiting for her at home. Lily and Lucas treated the project as though it already existed. They offered suggestions, drew pictures of classrooms, and regularly asked for updates. One evening, Lucas placed a hand-drawn sign on the refrigerator that read Future Learning Center Headquarters. Rachel laughed every time she saw it. Yet the sign also reminded her that her children believed in the dream completely, sometimes more than she did. During one mentoring session, participants were asked to present their projects before a review panel. The idea immediately terrified Rachel. Public speaking had never been one of her strengths. As presentation day approached, her anxiety steadily increased. She revised notes repeatedly and practiced during every spare moment. The night before the presentation, she considered withdrawing entirely. While reviewing materials at the kitchen table, she sighed heavily and rested her head in her hands. Lily looked up from her homework. "You are scared." Rachel smiled weakly. "A little." "Why?" Lucas asked. "Because I do not want to fail." The twins exchanged a glance. Then Lily shrugged. "You always tell us that trying is more important than being perfect." Rachel laughed softly. Hearing her own advice repeated back to her felt strangely powerful. The next day, she stood before the review panel and delivered her presentation. Her voice shook at first. Then something unexpected happened. As she described working families, after-school challenges, and opportunities for community support, she stopped focusing on herself. She focused on the people she hoped to help. The nervousness gradually disappeared. By the time she finished, the room was completely engaged. Several panel members asked thoughtful questions. Others praised the practical nature of the proposal. Afterward, Rachel stepped outside feeling relieved. A few minutes later, Daniel Carter joined her near the building entrance. "You did well," he said. Rachel smiled. "I survived." Daniel laughed. "You did more than survive." For a moment, they watched people leaving the conference center. Then Daniel became thoughtful. "Do you remember the first question I asked you?" Rachel immediately nodded. "I think about it almost every day." "Good." He smiled. "Because you are finally starting to answer it." The comment stayed with her during the drive home. Daniel was right. The answer was no longer theoretical. Every choice she made, every plan she developed, and every obstacle she overcame was slowly becoming part of that answer. Rachel had spent years believing her dream belonged in the past. Now she was beginning to understand something remarkable. The dream had never disappeared. It had simply been waiting for the moment she was ready to believe in it again. And very soon, an opportunity would arrive that could turn her vision into something far more real than she ever imagined possible. And very soon, an opportunity would arrive that could turn her vision into something far more real than she ever imagined possible. The opportunity appeared on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Rachel Morgan was finishing inventory reports at the grocery store when her phone vibrated with an incoming email notification. Expecting another routine message from the mentoring program, she opened it without much thought. Within seconds, her heart began racing. The foundation had completed its review process. 3 projects had been selected to receive development grants and long-term support. Rachel's proposal was one of them. She read the email twice, then a third time. The words remained exactly the same. Her community learning center had been approved for funding consideration and a full feasibility partnership. For a moment, she simply sat there staring at the screen. Months earlier, the idea existed only inside an old storage box filled with forgotten notebooks. Now experts believed it could become reality. By the time she arrived home, Lily and Lucas immediately sensed something different. Rachel had barely stepped through the apartment door before both twins surrounded her with questions. "What happened?" Lucas asked. "You are smiling," Lily added. Rachel laughed and handed them the printed email. The twins read every line with growing excitement. When they reached the final paragraph, both erupted into celebration. Lucas nearly knocked over a kitchen chair while jumping around the room. Lily hugged her mother so tightly that Rachel could barely breathe. Watching their reaction brought unexpected tears to her eyes. The children were celebrating more than a project. They were celebrating the possibility of a future they had helped believe in from the very beginning. Over the next several weeks, Rachel became deeply involved in planning meetings. Consultants evaluated locations. Community leaders offered support. Parents participated in surveys and focus groups. Every step revealed how much demand existed for the services Rachel hoped to provide. Yet despite the progress, self-doubt occasionally returned. One evening, after a particularly long meeting, Rachel remained behind organizing paperwork. The conference room had emptied except for Daniel Carter, who was reviewing notes nearby. "You look concerned," he observed. Rachel sighed. "Sometimes I worry that everyone expects more from me than I can deliver." Daniel leaned back in his chair thoughtfully. "Do you know something I have learned over the years?" Rachel looked up. "What?" "Most capable people spend their time questioning themselves." He smiled. "The people who concern me are usually the ones who never question anything." Rachel laughed softly. "That is oddly reassuring." Daniel nodded. "Good." After a brief pause, his expression became more serious. "Rachel, this project is not moving forward because of luck. It is moving forward because people believe in the vision behind it." His words carried weight because they felt completely sincere. For years, Rachel had measured success by financial stability alone. Now she was beginning to understand another kind of success. The ability to create positive change mattered too. As spring approached, momentum continued building. Community organizations expressed interest in partnerships. Volunteers offered assistance. Even local schools reached out with ideas for collaboration. Everywhere Rachel looked, support seemed to be growing. One Saturday morning, she brought Lily and Lucas to visit a potential property that might eventually become the center. The building was old and needed work, but its possibilities were easy to imagine. Classrooms, activity spaces, tutoring rooms, family programs. As they walked through the empty halls, the twins excitedly suggested ideas for nearly every corner of the building. Rachel listened with a smile. For the first time, the dream felt tangible. Not perfect, not guaranteed, but real. Standing inside that quiet building, she realized something important. The project was no longer just about proving herself capable. It was about helping families who deserved the same support she once wished existed. And as that realization settled into her heart, another truth was becoming impossible to ignore. Somewhere along the journey, Daniel had become far more than a mentor. He had become one of the most important people in her life. Somewhere along the journey, Daniel had become far more than a mentor. He had become one of the most important people in her life. Rachel Morgan did not realize how much her life had changed until one ordinary Tuesday evening. She was sitting at the kitchen table helping Lily and Lucas with homework when she noticed something unusual. The apartment felt different. Not larger, not wealthier, not easier, simply different. For years, every day had felt like a battle against time, bills, and uncertainty. Now, despite still working hard, she no longer carried the same constant weight on her shoulders. The change was not financial. It was internal. She believed in herself again. That realization followed her throughout the following weeks as the Learning Center project continued moving forward. Architects completed preliminary plans. Community organizations committed resources. Volunteers signed up to help. What once seemed impossible was gradually becoming inevitable. Yet the most significant transformation was happening inside Rachel herself. She spoke with confidence during meetings. She trusted her instincts when making decisions. She no longer apologized every time she shared an opinion. The woman who once doubted whether she belonged in the room was becoming a leader. One afternoon, Daniel Carter invited her to attend a regional community development conference. The event brought together nonprofit leaders, educators, and business executives from across the state. Months earlier, Rachel would have immediately declined. This time she accepted without hesitation. During the conference, several speakers discussed innovation, leadership, and economic development. Rachel listened carefully, occasionally taking notes. Then something unexpected happened. One of the organizers approached her during a break. "Would you be willing to participate in tomorrow's discussion panel?" Rachel nearly dropped her coffee. Me? The organizer smiled. Several people have been talking about your project. We think attendees would benefit from hearing your perspective. Rachel's first instinct was panic. Her second instinct was to say no. Before she could respond, Daniel appeared beside her. I think you should do it. Rachel looked at him. Of course you do. Daniel laughed. Because you are ready. The next morning, Rachel sat on stage before hundreds of attendees. Looking out across the audience, she felt nervous. Then she noticed Daniel seated near the front row. He simply nodded. Somehow that small gesture settled her nerves. When the discussion began, Rachel shared her experiences honestly. She talked about raising twins alone. She discussed the challenges facing working parents. She explained how years of personal struggle helped shape the vision behind the Learning Center. As she spoke, something remarkable happened. The audience connected with her story. People were not responding to statistics or business terminology. They were responding to authenticity. Afterward, dozens of attendees approached her with encouragement and support. During the drive home, Rachel reflected on everything that had happened since the day she met Daniel outside the grocery store. The contrast felt almost unbelievable. Back then, she had measured herself by limitations. Now she was beginning to recognize strengths she never knew she possessed. That evening, Lily and Lucas insisted on hearing every detail from the conference. They listened proudly as Rachel described the panel discussion. When she finished, Lucas grinned. See? We told you. Rachel laughed. Told me what? That you could do it. Lily nodded enthusiastically. You just needed someone else to tell you too. Their answer stayed with her long after bedtime. Children often saw the truth more clearly than adults. Later that night, Rachel received a message from Daniel congratulating her on the presentation. She smiled as she read it. Then she realized something she had been avoiding for weeks. Her feelings for him had grown far beyond admiration or gratitude. The realization did not frighten her the way it once might have. Instead, it felt natural, honest, earned. And as summer approached, bringing the Learning Center closer to completion, Rachel sensed that another important chapter of her life was quietly beginning to unfold. And as summer approached, bringing the Learning Center closer to completion, Rachel sensed that another important chapter of her life was quietly beginning to unfold. The grand opening of the Community Learning Center was scheduled for a bright Saturday morning in early June. Rachel Morgan arrived before sunrise, unlocking the front doors while the town was still quiet. For several minutes, she stood alone inside the building. Sunlight slowly entered through the windows, illuminating classrooms, activity spaces, study areas, and family resource rooms that had once existed only in her imagination. The sight filled her with gratitude, not because the journey had been easy, but because she remembered exactly where it started. She remembered the exhaustion, the doubts, the years spent believing that survival was the same thing as living. Most of all, she remembered a simple question asked by a stranger sitting on a bench outside a grocery store. By mid-morning, families began arriving. Children explored the classrooms with excitement. Parents met volunteers and staff members. Community leaders attended the ceremony. The building quickly filled with energy and optimism. Rachel moved through the crowd greeting guests, answering questions, and thanking everyone who helped make the center possible. Every few minutes, she caught sight of Lily and Lucas proudly giving unofficial tours as though they owned the place themselves. Their enthusiasm made her smile. They had been part of the dream long before anyone else believed it could happen. Shortly before the opening ceremony, Rachel stepped outside to take a breath. Daniel Carter was standing near the entrance watching families arrive. Quite a day, he said. Rachel nodded. Sometimes I still cannot believe it is real. Daniel looked toward the building. It is real because you made it real. Rachel smiled. Months earlier, she would have argued with the compliment. Now she simply accepted it. They stood together in comfortable silence before Daniel spoke again. Do you remember the first conversation we had? Rachel laughed softly. I remember every word. Daniel smiled. Good. A few minutes later, the ceremony began. Local leaders spoke briefly. Volunteers were recognized. Then Rachel was invited to address the crowd. Standing at the podium, she looked out at the families gathered before her. For a moment, she saw reflections of her own past in many of their faces. Parents doing their best. Families carrying responsibilities. People searching for opportunities. Then she began speaking. She talked about community, resilience, and hope. She thanked everyone who contributed to the project. Finally, She shared the story of a question that had changed her life. The audience listened quietly. When she finished, applause filled the room. After the ceremony, families continued exploring the center. Programs officially began that afternoon. Children participated in activities. Parents met mentors and support coordinators. Everywhere Rachel looked, she saw the purpose behind every hour of work. Later that evening, after the celebration ended, Rachel sat outside on a bench near the entrance. The location reminded her of where the journey began. A few minutes later, Daniel joined her. "I have been waiting to hear something," he said. Rachel smiled knowingly. "I think I know what it is." Daniel nodded. "Do you have an answer now?" Rachel looked toward the learning center. Families were still leaving the building, smiling and talking about future programs. Then she looked back at him. "You once asked me what I would build if nobody could tell me no." She paused. "This. I would build this." Daniel smiled. "I was hoping you would say that." Rachel laughed softly. For the first time, the answer